The funny thing about this argument, not just your caller, but other people, the funny thing is, it's as if democracy is a one-off thing. You get one shot at it and then you have to shut up. When the election happened in 2010 and the Tories won, Labour didn't just go, fair enough, you've won. We're not going to oppose anything. In 1997, the Tories didn't say, Labour have won, we have to shut up for 5 years. The Tories opposed the minimum wage. The Tories opposed the national minimum wage. The Tories opposed all kinds of Labour legislation, even with Labour's massive majority, massive mandate. Democracy is not 1 minute in a polling booth and then shutting up for the rest of your lifetime. If people disagree about the implementation of Brexit, which a lot of people do, because nobody said that Britain would leave the customs union. Nobody said that Britain would leave the single market during the campaign. There were all kinds of things said, but that wasn't said. Voting on the detail, signing off on the detail, denying the public the right to sign off on the detail of a deal, which will affect them, their children, their children's children, will affect our country for a century. Denying people the right to sign off on that, that's the profoundly undemocratic thing. And that's on top of denying me and Tony and other people the right to argue about this, as if we've just got to shut up while we watch the country being careered over a precipice. We're not allowed to say, we're not allowed to talk. That is the most anti-democratic thing about this whole discourse, this attempt to delegitimize people who say, hold on, is this the right thing to do for our country? Can we just look at this again? We're not committed to doing something disastrous simply because we had a yes-no referendum. Having another yes-no referendum on the deal doesn't seem to be anti-democratic in any way, shape or form.
I understand it's a decision for the councils to make, but I just think that we need to look at the overall tax take on people with incomes in the round and include those. And I would encourage you to look at the impact.
No, that is a very fair question. Of course, I should look at taxation in the round and arriving at my decisions, and I think income tax is a substantial engagement and a substantial shift this year to make it fairer, more progressive, and restructure it. And I'm looking forward to seeing the Labour Party's position on income tax, which I'm told is imminent. It would have been helpful it came before the discussion paper, after the discussion paper, during the course of the parliamentary discourse. Every other party seemed to want to engage in it. And even after the Labour Party found a new leader, I still didn't get a tax position. But I'm delighted to hear that I know the income tax policy of the Labour Party. And maybe the Labour Party should take into account the Labour Party's position on income tax when it drives a position on council tax as well.
Right. Okay, thanks for that, Cabinet Secretary.
My pleasure.
Mr Mason, I'll take your intervention now.
John Mason.
Well, I appreciate it very much. Since I tried to intervene, the member has mentioned £700 million. Could you spell out for us how he would raise this £700 million? Which would it be cuts elsewhere, or is it increased taxes?
James Kelly.
Having seen what a mess the Cabinet Secretary made of his tax proposals, Labour will take adequate time in order to...
Richard Leonard.
I'm sure you will say that it's got nothing to do with you or the SNP and blame Westminster.
And please, my lords, forgive the unparliamentary language and block your ears if you are sensitive or easily offended. Yelling, fucking Tory cunt.
How sad are you at the prospect of Brexit happening?
Well, as you know, I was a strong Remainer. I campaigned hard to stay in. Unfortunately, 17.5 million people across the United Kingdom didn't agree with me.
In Scotland, the majority did.
Well, that's true, but also the majority in Scotland agreed that this was a decision, and the sort of numbers on the ballot paper, what we were asked was whether the UK should stay or leave, and that was the question. And 17.5 million people, including 1 million in Scotland, said that we should leave. So let's try and do that in the best way possible.
I'm glad you mentioned Clause 11, because that's really why I'm asking you these questions.
I thought it might be. Yeah.
See, Professor Dugan went on to say that what he extrapolated from the joint report, what had been agreed in December, was that the internal market of the United Kingdom is going to be based on a relatively extensive conception of the UK government's powers vis-à-vis the devolved regions. Now, Secretary of State, the House was promised by the Secretary of State for Scotland that at report stage of the EU withdrawal bill, amendments would be brought forward to deal with the Scottish and Welsh Government's concerns about what has loosely been described as a power grab in Clause 11. The House was promised that.
Very loosely.
Now, that promise wasn't fulfilled. I'm just wondering if what you've committed yourselves to in relation to Northern Ireland in the joint report is the reason why these amendments weren't brought forward at report stage, because you need the United Kingdom Government, in order to deliver this internal market concept, needs to gather into itself these powers that currently rest with the devolved administrations.
Cherry, you're a lawyer, and you would know when you use the word extrapolate, it's not the same as the word deduce. And that's what he's done, he's extrapolated, wrongly in my view. Actually, it had no impact. Now, what I suggest you do, bluntly, is pose these questions to the Scottish Government. Because let me finish the sentence.
Let me interrupt you there, because the Scottish Government and the Welsh Government have already produced amendments. Your Secretary of State for Scotland went away and said that he would produce his amendments at report stage. So I'm afraid you can't shift this on to the Scottish or Welsh Government.
If you want to question the Secretary of State for Scotland, you must summon him here. My view is very simple. We are seeking to get the best outcome on Clause 11. The discussions have been going on, are still going on. I think we will get a good outcome. I think one which the Scottish people, the Welsh people and the Northern Irish people will like. But we've got to get it right. Right is better than quick.
So why were the amendments to Clause 11 that were promised at report stage not produced at report stage?
Because the agreements weren't concluded.
Because?
The agreements weren't concluded.
Were you involved in the decision to delay these amendments?
The bill's mine.
Right.
So you must assume I have responsibility, whatever else happens. You know?
Is that a yes? So are you saying that the reason the amendments weren't brought forward is because discussions are ongoing on the framework with the Scottish Government?
That's part of it, and because they're not ready yet. When it's ready, it'll be delivered.
So why did the Secretary of State for Scotland promise they would?
You must ask the Secretary of State for Scotland. You must ask the Secretary of State for Scotland.
Okay.
Presiding Officer, I'm sorry if it upsets Willie Rennie, but I am not prepared to apologise for listening to doctors who know best about how to treat sick children in this country.
Mr Rennie, before... Order, please. I'm sorry, Mr Rennie, hold on a second. I'm sorry, indulging that level of clapping does not impress anybody. Could you please keep that a minimum?
In particular, I think we must retain the right to diverge from EU laws. One of the key points of leaving the European Union is to ensure that we can once again make our own laws in our own parliament and not be subject to laws made by people we don't elect and we can't remove.
So, Mr. Speaker, could my honourable friend, the excellent Minister, name me a single civil service forecast, leaked or otherwise, that has been accurate?
Minister. Mr. Speaker, no, I am not able to name an accurate forecast, and I think that they are always wrong and wrong for good reasons. Mr. Speaker, that's just simply not the case, as I think I've not hesitated to say several times. This economic analysis does not show the country being worse off. It shows the country being better off under all circumstances. It shows GDP growing. It shows He says it's nonsense, Mr. Speaker. I can assure him it's not nonsense. In all circumstances, it shows GDP growth growing. It shows GDP increasing. The point of the government's policy must be to carry through faithfully the decision of the British people and to do so in a way which proves these doommongers and naysayers wrong.
In the meantime, it's up to the rest of us to voice their concern, which, as I say, is that of the Parliament as a whole and not just the SNP. In particular, I make the point that the Scottish Conservative members of the Scottish Parliament fully support their Constitutional Committee. It was a unanimous report that I quoted a moment ago. Now, the noble Lord Hope spoke earlier much more eloquently than I do on this subject, and he is quite a remarkable man because he gets away with saying things which the rest of us wouldn't be allowed to do. He has that air of judicial authority and scholarship, so that when he says that King Henry VIII didn't go to Scotland, that Oliver Cromwell did, that is a devastating reflection on the state of this bill, because it's not the Henry VIII powers that matter, it's the fact that Oliver Cromwell dispensed with Parliament altogether. and what this bill does is actually to dispense with the Scottish Parliament. That is why it's unacceptable, and that's why we must have an amendment brought forward during the committee stage which puts right a totally unsatisfactory bill as it stands at the moment.
Yeah. Mr. Speaker, does the Minister agree with me that it's about time the government demonstrated a no-surrender attitude to the EU bureaucrats who try to blackmail us, bully us over air flights, passenger duty and everything else? Stand up to the man, stand up to the EU, and let's get on with leaving the EU.
Thank Ministers and members for their time. Point of order. Okay. Point of order, Neil Findlay.
In relation to Rhoda Grant's question, yesterday the journalist James McInerney exposed yet again the government's conduct in their handling of freedom of information requests, with special advisers routinely copied into and politically interfering in replies, and the Deputy First Minister caught ordering key documents to be withdrawn. I hope you agree that this is a very serious issue. Last year, this Parliament supported a fully independent review of the government's performance of freedom of information. So can I therefore ask if you have been informed when that review will take place and how you can assist us in ensuring that the will of Parliament prevails?
Thank Mr Findlay. I don't regard that as a point of order at all. The member has made a point. The member knows that if Parliament's passed a motion, it's for the government to choose how to respond. But we do respect the will of Parliament to be responded to. Thank you very much.
Now, I know you said that you also wanted a new body for the North to have a say on Brexit. Now, of course, we know, and we're going to be hearing later, actually, from the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, and we know that the other nations are represented in the talks on Brexit. Is it practical for the North to have its own voice?
Well, Scotland is actually represented on a cabinet committee that's discussing Brexit. That's not the case for the English regions.
Do members have any further questions?
Yeah, I wondered if I could ask a final point. In relation to the whole process, I mean, what we're finding is obviously that 40 years of economic and political convergence, integration, whatever you want to call it, with the EU, is proven hugely problematic to unravel. I wonder if that provides any lessons for others or those like yourself who would seek to unravel 300 years of political, economic and social integration with the rest of the UK.
I'm happy to answer if you wish me to answer.
Might rule that one out, Mr Findlay. It was a little bit mischievous. So
I would simply say preparation and thoughtfulness, neither of which we have seen from the UK.
You never let us down.
Hugh Gaffney.
What impact will new relief and business rates have on your infrastructure plan?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
The new relief on business rates, what impact will that have on your plan?
I have to confess to being much more interested in Ruth Davidson's bigger challenge and decision, which is whether or not she's going to parachute into a seat in Westminster and try and reinvigorate, save the Tory party. I think that's what we were talking about.
No, but I mean, I think it's now established that she might well do that, but she can only do that after the next Holyrood elections, where she needs to do well. And the question is, as Alan Cochrane is suggesting, whether this could be the end of the Ruth Davidson bandwagon, if you like.
I don't think so. I think she's hugely popular.
Ian McWhirter from the Sunday Herald. I just wanted to congratulate you, Bernard, on your admirable candour about the powers of the Scottish Parliament, or rather, as you said, the lack of them, because you were saying that essentially it's a fantasy. They didn't really exercise those powers, only as virtues as being part of the EU. But that will come as a surprise to a lot of people in the Scottish Parliament over powers such as animal welfare, food standards, control of pesticides, as well as agriculture and fisheries, fracking, GM crops. You can understand why people in the Scottish Parliament are a little concerned at the prospect of these being removed from the remit of the Scottish Parliament, and also for what is really a fundamental change in the Constitution of the United Kingdom. Because as you rightly said, under the Scotland Act 1998, these powers repatriated from Brussels do automatically, as a matter of law, go straight to the Scottish Parliament. So any way you look at it, this is a fantastic change, surely, in the UK Constitution, and directly affects the status and standing of the Scottish Parliament.
Well, do you know, I haven't been in many Scottish pubs recently, but I'm sure they talk of nothing else except this.
You'd be surprised. You would.
In fact, I hear a slight attempt to parody what I was saying in your question. The answer is, if the SNP want to make a massive row in it, they'll try. But what's the point? Because we've all got to get on and find a solution to this problem. And I reiterate, I don't know about the particular powers you mentioned, but the Scottish Parliament's never been in charge of the Common Agricultural Policy, as far as I've been aware. And for the United Kingdom Parliament to retain powers to create a Common Agricultural Policy is not taking a power away from the Scottish Parliament, only in the most theoretical constitutional terms. So there is something of a manufactured dispute about this. And I say this, if the SNP carry on threatening withholding legislative consent motions, they will simply devalue that instrument of political influence. Because if we're talking law, constitutional law, the legislative consent motions are of no constitutional legal significance whatsoever, because the clause in the Scotland Act, which provides for these legislative consent motions, is not binding in law.
Well, I recognise the important issue that the honourable gentleman has raised, because we want British football fans to be able to be safe when they're enjoying watching the England team.
And perhaps if she's around afterwards, I might be able to give one to her.
I'm very happy to say to my honourable friend that if he'd like to come along and see me afterwards, I'm very happy to do that.
This view is consistent with public opinion. According to a social attitude survey published earlier this year, 2/3 of voters in Scotland think that once the UK leaves the EU, the rules on immigration should be the same in Scotland as in the rest of the UK.
That is why she is marking this date right now.
Faisal, thank you very much indeed.
Finally, you'll have seen Patrick Stewart perhaps earlier on saying that there's going to be this new campaign, The People's Vote.
Yeah.
To bring back, and it seems perfectly reasonable, to bring back the terms that have been negotiated, the actual deal, nothing unspecific, nothing vague, nothing hypothetical, the real deal, and let people vote on the real deal. Why not? Why not?
I mean, I think we are going. People had a vote. It was a great vote, and they voted with a substantial majority to leave the EU. We're now trying to deliver on that mandate from the people. I think we'll get a great result, and we'll be able to not only to have a gigantic free trade deal with our friends and partners across the channel, but to adapt to Patrick. Oh, he had something to do with Star Wars, didn't he? We'll be able to boldly go again. We'll be able to boldly go again to areas that perhaps we've neglected over the last
full of dangerous alien spacecraft waiting to zap us.
No, on the contrary, friendly, wonderful places where we can renew old friendships, rebuild relationships, and develop fantastic new free trade deals. And a lot of that is going to be on the table at the Commonwealth Summit next week.
Foreign Secretary, thanks very much indeed for talking to us.
I don't know if you noticed, I used to be on Question Time, and I used to be on Any Questions on the wireless till my political allegiance became clear. And it does strike me as quite curious that unionists can have a marvellous career in broadcasting, because apparently that's not biased. It's not biased for them to sit and tell us that we're too wee and we're too stupid to govern ourselves. But anyone that might think differently, I mean, I lost a lot of work. I still don't get the odd television gig. I was actually, it's a true story that mustn't leave this room. Oh, if you insist, tell folk. I was with the commissioning editor from Radio Scotland, having a beer. Now, you need to understand, most of my work in radio and telly has been live. I do live current affairs stuff. And he took a call and he said, hold on, this is important. Louise White had called in sick the next day, and he said, listen, I'm going to have to go. I need to find a replacement. I said, you're taking the piss, aren't you? And he said, no, I've got to find a replacement. I said, and I'm cheap, because I'm an immigrant. Okay, funnier in my head than out loud. But he looked straight back at me and he goes, well, you know I can't use you. You know about the email. And I said, what email? He goes, well, you know that your name appears with other names of people we can't have news output at BBC Scotland. Now, I thought the BBC was a balance. What's been difficult for me, and difficult in a kind of middle-class way, in that you have to have a chocolate croissant when there's no almond croissants way. So let's be clear, it's that sort of level of difficulty. It's having to continue to work for the BBC as it's transmuted into a state broadcaster. The clue's in the title. British Broadcasting Corporation. As it stands, we raise 10% of the revenue for the BBC in Scotland and get less than 5% of the programmes. And a lot of that 5% is flown in, plaque-driven. You know, for one of the most creative countries in the world, we should be all over the BBC.
It has been widely reported that Mike Russell was happy with the amendment and agreed to the deal before being overruled by Nicola Sturgeon. So, can the Secretary of State confirm whether there was an agreement on this issue from the Scottish Government at any point during the process?
What I can confirm is that there were extensive negotiations around the proposal, which has ultimately been agreed by the Welsh Government, and that the Scottish Government were actively involved in those discussions. But I think, to be fair to Mike Russell, he has never led us to believe that there was any other decision-maker in the Scottish Government than Nicola Sturgeon.
Changes are rather ponderous, sorry, but they really need to speed up. We've got a lot of questions to get through. Let's get on with it. Leslie Laird.
Thank you for that non-response. Mr Speaker, the Labour Party anticipated political games would be played with the Constitution. It's time for the people of Scotland to know exactly what's been going on behind closed doors. So, will he tell me the truth and shame the devil and agree to publish the minutes of all meetings, conversations between the Scottish and the UK Government and any member of the Conservative Party or the SNP on Clause 11?
Mr Speaker, what we will publish is the clause and the intergovernmental agreement which goes along with it, which is what the Welsh Government have signed up to. That's what was on the table for the Scottish Government to agree. It remains on the table.
And the latest amendment that the UK Government has tabled says the Seoul Convention will apply, in so many words. They restate it. But then they say, if legislative consent is given, or legislative consent is withheld, or there's no answer to the request for legislative consent, the outcome will be exactly the same. So they've chosen to highlight this anomaly in the thing. We've got a convention, but it is not enforceable.
But nevertheless, that's been accepted by the Welsh
the Welsh Government has accepted it, and the Scottish Government hasn't. There is a difference there. But as I say, that's always been there in the devolution settlement. It's just been highlighted by the Brexit debate and the need to do something about these competencies.
Does it matter that it's been highlighted, given that everybody knew it was there all the time?
Yes, because here I'm not speaking as a lawyer, because I'm not a lawyer, but politically, this was a compromise. Politically, it was saying, yes, we'll respect your competences, but we'll have a fallback where we will be able to legislate anyway, and we'll try not to talk about it. But once you write it down in such an explicit way, then
people start talking about it.
We're just drawing attention to that anomaly and we're not resolving it.
Yes. To what extent does the acceptance by the Welsh Government of this proposal put pressure on the Scottish Government, if you like, to fall in line?
I don't think the next chapter of our ongoing conversation about the future of devolution in the United Kingdom is going to be about more powers. I think that's what most of the last 20 years has been about. I think that the next chapter is going to be about more cooperation, not more powers. It's not the self-rule bit of the equation that we need to focus on now, not the things which we as MSPs can do for ourselves because they're devolved. It's how we integrate devolved government with reserved government. It's the shared communication, it's the shared rule. That needs to be the focus now, not an endless search for more powers.
I'd make the wider point that while tens of thousands of people attended that rally yesterday, millions of people didn't.
The First Minister of Scotland has indicated that she's going to initiate a new round of debate about the prospects for Scottish independence. Ahead of the 2014 referendum, you said a currency union was incompatible. Have you changed your view on that?
I think my words were a little more carefully drawn than that. Look, there are a number of requirements for an effective currency union, and they include an element of fiscal union. I think that's pretty widely accepted. It's clear there's different ways to construct that. It obviously also includes, I should say obviously, but it also includes having a form of financial market union, banking union, capital market union, all the components that the European Monetary Union is still trying to fully construct. And I think the best way I can frame it is to quote the president of the ECB, who has said repeatedly that European Monetary Union is unfinished business because some of the elements are there, but not all of the elements are there.
Particularly political union, presumably.
Well, the question becomes, not from an economic perspective, it's not necessary. The question is, from a political perspective, if you have this sort of shared economic sovereignty, you require a political union. But there's lots of other determinants of whether one has a political union that others can judge.
Thank you.
Could you just explain that a bit further, your point on that? You were just making
well, I was making the observation that the question was asked whether a currency union requires a political union. My response, what I intended to say, was that no, from the strict economics it doesn't. It's for others to judge whether the degree of shared sovereignty, such as some form of fiscal arrangement, which some sort of fiscal equalization arrangement, whether that in and of itself, which is highly desirable for an effective currency union, whether that has political ramifications. But that's an observation that then drifts into politics for others to answer. There's lots of, final point, there are lots of examples in this world where economic sovereignty is shared. Think global financial regulation is one of many examples. Trade agreements is another example. Economic sovereignty is shared. And there's not political union. But that's your world. Those are political decisions to be made.
Thank you.
The critics, of course, of the SNP are saying
they simply put their hands over their ears and say, we don't want to hear, nah, 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 nah.
Is this the starting gun on another independence referendum? It looks like it. I took a wander in Glasgow yesterday evening and asked these people for their thoughts. Do you want another referendum?
No.
Why not?
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, I don't think the first one should have been done. There was no real consideration for what the country wanted. There was no huge majority of people saying that they wanted the country to change. It was far too much on a knife edge at the beginning, and all it did was tear the country apart the first time.
Do you want another referendum?
Yes, in light of Brexit. It would be a great chance to actually be able to remain in the EU, possibly, or at least hasten the return.
I'm super for it. Personally, I was unfortunately in America during the first one, so I wasn't able to vote, but I definitely vote for it if another one came around.
Why? What's the reason?
I believe that, Scotland deserves its independence after the hundreds and hundreds of years that it's gone through via British rule. Also, I think Scotland has a lot more to offer as an independent country than it's been told it has to offer. Yeah.
What would you think if there was to be maybe the start of a drive towards a second independence referendum?
I can't imagine a worse idea. It's a terrible distraction from the real business of politics that the First Minister should be engaged in. The First Minister has an obsession with independence,
largely due, I think, to a hatred of the English.
And lastly, here's someone going in for a bag of chips. Is that right? Into the chip shop?
Yes.
If there was to be a second independence referendum, would you embrace that?
Yes, I would.
Why?
We're just a very different country to England, and that's kind of the long and short of it. I think we should be making our own decisions.
Okay, that was last night.
The two ferries that are going to be that are being constructed, are they going to be? When are they going to be delivered? And is that when you expected them to be delivered?
So, I think as David had already said, they were expected to be delivered this summer. The latest indication we have is they'll be delivered sometime in winter 18-19. So as soon as they are delivered, then we'll be able to put them into operation.
Sorry, I always get confused, and the committee will understand my confusion. Is that winter of 18 or winter of 19? Just clarify. Is that the winter this year or the winter next year?
Winter next year. So sorry, it's our winter timetable, which is 18-19. So it's next winter.
So November is winter, isn't it? So that's November 19.
18.
So between 18 and 19. Sorry, I always get confused, and I like to just understand, because we usually get into a discussion about seasons, and then
our winter
that
period
confuses
runs
me.
from October 18 through to March 19.
Okay. And
the woman with, I was going to say white, blonde, no, I got white hair. The middle hair. Yes,
white.
you. Yes, it's white, very good.
Yes.
Like mine, yes.
I'm mature.
Yes, good. Well, give us a mature comment, madam.
I find it incredible that there is so little knowledge of what is going on in Scotland and the feelings that are about in Scotland. Don't judge Perth as an example, because Perth is quite Tory. But Scotland is quite angry in the way that we are being ignored in the Brexit negotiations. Our government that we voted for, is being ignored and sidelined and treated as if they were non-entities.
And what would you think should be happening?
Well, for instance, we voted 2/3 to remain in the EU, and we were lumped together as this country, Britain. We are not a country. We are countries, and we should be respected as separate individual countries with our own views.
So going back, sorry, no, I get...
This paper that's come out
hang on a second.
is a consultative paper. We will be discussing it, whether to keep the pound. And it's a Scottish pound, as well as an English pound.
But would you have an...
I get very annoyed with Tory
but nevertheless... But your fury is very mature too. I can see it. But
it's been festering for a few years.
Well, here you are able to let rip. But do you want a vote on independence as soon as possible, so you can decide all these things yourself? Is that what you're saying?
We won't have it as soon as possible. It might be set at the end of this year.
No, but do you want it? Do you want it?
I would like it. I know what I would vote. And to be honest, surely it's every country's right to self-determination. If I asked every panellist that question, I bet they would say yes, but not Scotland.
Okay.
I just wanted to follow up on that last discussion that we had about the impact it was having on business and the need for businesses to have certainty. I spent a large part of last week during our recess meeting my local businesses in the borders. Some are multinational companies, some are local companies, but collectively employing hundreds of people. And a few things struck me. One was how busy they are just now. They couldn't keep up with their orders, and they've never known a time like it. And when I asked them what their biggest challenge was that they foresaw, none of them mentioned Brexit, which I found astonishing. I just wondered, and when I challenged them in that, I said, why are you not saying Brexit? Because that's what the press is saying, that's what our colleagues are saying in the Commons. And their response was, well, business is good at adapting. Business is good at dealing with challenges, dealing with the challenge of the world marketplace, and they just adapt accordingly. So I wonder if, I accept Brexit is going to be challenging, but I wonder from the perspective of business, Is this more of an academic, theoretical challenge, which is being sort of exaggerated perhaps, as opposed to the practical reality which the businesses on the ground are facing and how they are approaching it?
I wanted to pick up on the fisheries issue because I think this is a crucial one for Scotland's fish and seafood industry. The issue of securing access to the EU market, because the EU applies a relatively high tariff on fish and seafood. The tariffs are as high as 24% on some products. So Scotland, as you mentioned, Scotland's third export to the EU is fish and seafood, and about 75% of the UK's catch is exported to the EU. So this is a crucial market for Scotland's fish and seafood industry. It's one where, if, for example, we revert to trade based on WTO tariff levels, it'll face an extremely high tariff that could effectively block its access to the European market with some key products. And we know with Norway's fish sector, Norway does not have the same kind of tariff-free access to the EU market that Scotland and the UK has, and that's part of the reason why Norway moved a lot of its fish processing industry to Scotland. So if Scotland all of a sudden faces a very high tariff on its exports to the EU, that could have profoundly negative impacts on the Scottish fish processing industry. And we may see Scotland's fish processing industry move to places like Poland in order to access the rest of the EU market tariff-free. So that's why this issue is so crucial for Scotland's industry.
Okay.
You know, I ran a business, as other members here have done before coming here. I spent 20 years doing so. And to run a business, you need to have a plan, you need to have a certainty of what you're aiming to achieve in terms of income and costs, and you need to be sure that you can retain your staff. And the difficulty we have at the moment is we don't know whether we're going to be in the single market. We don't know whether we're going to be in the customs union. We don't know whether there will be tariff-free trade. We don't know whether people from Poland and the EU will continue to be made welcome in Scotland, although we are very clear about that. So we don't know how much our costs are going to go up. We don't know how much our income is going to go down, and we don't know whether our staff will be around for much longer. I mean, those three matters are pillars of running a business, and I'm afraid unless or until the high-level detail about a Brexit plan is solved, how can you have a business plan with no figures? Can anyone explain that to me in the opposition parties? Because I've been waiting for a while for one.
Right. I'm sorry. Peter Chapman.
Cabinet Secretary, yesterday in the Chamber you accused the Conservatives of playing political games. I suggest you are doing exactly that. And you want Brexit to fail so that you can blame Westminster again. And I'm reflecting the feeling in the countryside that this SNP government is seen to be prepared to sacrifice agriculture on the altar of a second independence referendum.
Can I? Hold on, please, everyone. I'm deliberately looking for questions. It was a statement, and I'm afraid, Mr. Chapman, having made that statement, I'm going to move straight to the next question from Mr. Rumbles. So,
do you not feel a sense of responsibility and duty as the Cabinet Secretary for the Rural Economy in Scotland to be now developing a policy on a post-capped subsidy system for Scotland? And if it's not your job to do it, whose job is it? And if now's not the time, when is the time?
Well, in order to provide a clear policy on a system of financial support, you actually have to have a budget. If you don't have a budget, it's not possible to do anything other than theoritise a number of scenarios. If the budget is £25, £50, £100, £1,000, £1 million, you have different plans. I mean, it's a statement of the obvious.
Mr. Speaker, what options are available to us in this House to ensure that the government understands the real concern amongst people in Scotland at this unprecedented power grab, and how can we make sure our voices are heard?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given all the analyses show that the Scottish economy would fall by 2.9% in GDP if we took the least worst scenario of the single market and the customs union when we leave the EU, what is the GDP figure that the government are working towards with their current negotiating position?
It's not a classical political agreement. It's a country leaving the Union. We have to do that rule-based on the way it is described in the treaty. And we don't want trade-offs in the classical political sense. Also, we have indicated, as a second example to give you, that we will never accept a trade-off, for example, between, oh, we're going to give you a good cooperation from the British side on internal security and on external security if you give us a good deal on trade and economics. We will never accept that. This is not a classical political trade-off, dealing and wheeling between political parties.
Can I, 50% of the committee in front of you today are Scottish. Can I ask, is your memory of what you've said about Scotland better this afternoon than it was this morning? What do you mean? Well, this morning you said you couldn't remember saying something where it was said, or remembering tweeting about the possibility of Scotland, should it ever become independent, rejoining the European Union.
I've said this morning that we are not involved in the constitutional discussion.
But you didn't say that in February 2017 when you said it was a perfectly acceptable possibility. You didn't say that on the 24th of June 2016 when you tweeted that it's wrong that Scotland may be taken out of the EU when it voted to stay, happy to discuss with Nicola Sturgeon. Why were you
what I did.
Yeah. So you were happy to discuss that with Nicola Sturgeon, but you then said today that you would never ask a negotiator or coordinator for the European Parliament to intervene in the institutional setup of any countries involved in this.
Exactly. Yeah.
So in those discussions that you had with Nicola Sturgeon, you didn't feel you were intervening in any way?
If Mrs. Sturgeon wants to discuss with me the fact that the majority of the people...
Sorry, that tweet I was quoting was you saying you would be happy to discuss with Nicola Sturgeon.
Yeah, well, and what I did. So I got this meeting with her, where she explained that a majority of the Scottish people is not in favour to leave the European Union, and that she hopes for a solution where the outcome of the referendum can be in accordance with the wish to stay in the single market and into the customs union, because that's the main proposal from the paper that the Scottish authorities have published. And that's still an option. That's still an option if that from the British side they want to go in that direction, and we can find solutions for the freedom of movement of people. That is still that could work. So what I have said is in several occasions is that I will not intervene in the constitutional order of we as Europeans have not intervened in the constitutional order of Britain, saying, oh yeah, solve your problem by exploding your United Kingdom. That we will not do. That's not our task.
I like your language about exploding the United Kingdom if we were to vote for independence, but you did say in September 2016, if Scotland decides to leave the UK to be an independent state and they decide to be part of the EU, I think there is no big obstacle to do that. Do you not? Do you still support that?
Well, that's a fact. That's a simple fact, but that's not.
You don't think it's an obstacle for them to simply rejoin?
I think that the problem is not that for the moment. The problem is how we can find a close relationship between the UK and the EU, during that discussion, we will not do anything that is an interference in the constitutional order of the UK. That we're going to avoid absolutely. That's not our task.
Just slightly different on the non-tariff barrier elements. I'm going to give an example, which is probably one of the more extreme ones, just to give an idea of the issue. So every product of animal origin imported from outside of the EU has to enter the European Union via a veterinary border inspection post. The problem that the UK exports to the EU post-Brexit have is that Calais is not a veterinary border inspection post, the Eurotunnel is not a veterinary border inspection post, the closest is Dunkirk, which has low capacity for physical inspections, and then after that we're thinking about sort of Rotterdam or the like. You also have some issues on the UK side at Anglesey. So what are the solutions to that? As it stands, if you are sending, say, live fish through a veterinary border inspection post, that all of them are subject to documentary checks. About 50% are subject to physical inspections if it's live. If it's frozen, it's around 20%. You can have an agreement. The EU has some agreements, say with New Zealand on SPS, which reduces the frequency of the physical inspections, almost to the point of just if there's something obviously a bit off. Mm-hmm. But those products still have to enter via a veterinary border inspection post. So the issue you have on the UK side here for exports is what is your route to market now? Because you can't use if and until they're upgraded the Eurotunnel or Calais. Mm-hmm. So maybe Rotterdam. right? But that's a different sort of thing, and you're talking about a different type of shipment, and you have to think about if you're doing it on bulk or on frequency. So refilling supermarkets becomes a bit of an issue. The other option you have to avoid the need for veterinary border inspection posts entirely is what the EEA countries and the Swiss have done, and we don't know if Swiss is on the table. Let's just be clear about that. They have a bit of a unique scenario, and that's to apply the EU's sanitary and phytosanitary regime domestically in its entirety, and also to apply it to imports. So written into their agreements are their own veterinary border inspection posts through which products of animal origin from third countries enter. So essentially, which is what we do now. Which is what we do now. So we've essentially extended the SPS firewall. But for government, if that were available outside of, say, a single market option, which we don't know if it is yet, for the government, the trade-off there is that it does have an implication on the sort of agreements you can do with the rest of the world, particularly with the US, because it's become a joke. But it is actually an aggressive ask of the US. They would like to be able to sell their chicken here, which they can't do currently. They would like to be able to sell their beef that has been reared using hormones. Under the EU's SPS regime, you can't do that. So that's one of the trade-offs that the government has to work through. And this also is a big issue in Northern Ireland, because the EU's regime on this is very strict. And it does make sense when you think it through. It all sounds a bit binary. But these are products that could potentially cause damage to human health. They're quite high risk. And also, if there was some contamination and it just spilled over onto the side somewhere, it could cause, disease to break out. So there's a reason these inspections happen at the border.
Good morning, and a big confrontation with Brussels looms. Those who have waited are now blessed with a calm, decisive leader they can believe in. So thank you, Gareth Southgate. Meanwhile, this has been the most important week for Brexit since the vote itself 2 years ago. Theresa May has made her choice and decided we should stick pretty closely to the EU. Her critics this morning are angry, but they're holding their fire. It isn't a penalty shootout, but it's edge-of-the-seat stuff. In your waters, you feel we can take Croatia. England can take Croatia. I'm Scottish, I didn't say we. England can take Croatia.
Seed in President Putin's mind that he can get away with a lot more than he used to be able to get away with.
All right, James, there's a posse of Her Majesty's finest gathering behind you, so we better let you go and deal with them. Thanks very much indeed for that.
It is not too late to save Brexit. Yeah. We have time in these negotiations. We have changed tack once, and we can change again. Yeah. We must try now, because we will not get another chance to get it right. And it is absolute nonsense to imagine, as I fear some of my colleagues do, that we can somehow afford to make a botched treaty now and then break and reset the bone later on.
But the Scottish people voted to stay in the United Kingdom. So I think it's my message, and I'm an English MP giving a very strong message to the United Kingdom government, that if you want to make this work better, there's going to have to be some changes. I mean, take the Sewell Convention, for example. The Sewell Convention was casually put into an Act of Parliament as a kind of sop to devolutionists and nationalists. And it clearly means different things to different people. Well, the government should publish a paper as to how the Sewell Convention should really work, because at the moment it is just used as a means of highlighting the differences between Holyrood and Westminster,
but do you think
which isn't very satisfactory.
Do you think the UK government taking the Holyrood government to the UK Supreme Court does anything to further the aims of devolution?
Well, I would say that if the Holyrood Parliament is going to step outside the devolution settlement in pandering to nationalist sentiments, after the Scottish people have voted to remain part of the United Kingdom, well, that's part of what we need to discuss.
What happens effectively is that the BBC will take down material when it is alerted to such material being on the web.
So we're alerted by somebody?
We are alerted. In this
somebody
case,
alerted BBC to this website?
What happened was somebody alerted the BBC to the fact that there was a Labour councillor who had material on his website. The BBC issued a notification on that. He, in turn, indicated that we had not taken any action relative to the Wings Over Scotland material. And because we had been alerted to that, we had necessarily to take action. What we can't do, it would be absolutely impossible for us to do, is to patrol the web every single day and every single website. So we have to wait until we are alerted to material being there which potentially infringes copyright.
This is Councillor Scott Arthur you're talking about, because Wings Over Scotland have actually been communicating with him over the internet. Now, so just to go back, who exactly complained about the content on Wings Over Scotland website? This is the councillor.
I believe so. I wasn't party to that, so I couldn't say for definitively that was the case. But somebody certainly alerted the legal team to the amount of information, the amount of BBC content that was on that particular website.
Scottish ice cream parlour that sells mayonnaise-flavoured ice cream has to apologise to the rest of Scotland. You invented a food that's shitty even for Scotland. That's like making a porno that's too twisted for Japan. You've seen that porno.
Because this is a massive adjustment for me. I'm having to change a lot of the new thinking because it was I don't know how to explain it, but it was quite a, like when I've seen the light, I don't know how else to explain it. It just, everything clicked. And it was just like one day and it clicked. I mean, it was a few months ago. I was wearing my Union Jack gaff and holding a flag and I'm like, and I never saw them coming. And this is what I mean, but it's that, I don't know if it's like revelation or something, it's just that click. And it was like, yeah, we need independence. This is not working. And then everything becomes more clear as time goes on, and it was like that. That's how it was for me. That's all I can say. I mean, and it was like, we need to make our own choices.
We're not merely a union of nations. We are primarily and predominantly a nation of unions. We are not merely a family of nations. We are primarily and predominantly a nation of families.
Have you ever been to a company or a school or whatever when you're out doing your job and said, no, you can't promote it on social media, no, you can't take photographs?
Yeah, I've been to a range of visits where some of them will not have been subject to publicity.
But have you said, no, you can't?
I've visited,
have you ever said, no, you can't?
I've visited a range
Have
of...
you ever said, no, you can't take photographs or put it on social media?
I've visited a range of organisations, a range
You've
of
not
employers,
could you just answer the question?
I've visited a range of companies,
okay,
employers.
Jamie Hepburn, thank you very much
some of them have
indeed.
not been made public.
Yesterday on the BBC News at 1, reported on an improvement in Scotland's public finances, with an increase in revenue and a reduction in the deficit. In doing so, we said that the Scottish Government last year spent nearly £13.5 billion more than it raised. That was incorrect. That figure covers all public sector expenditure in Scotland, including areas controlled by the UK government and other public bodies. We apologise for that mistake on yesterday's programme.
If there's a vote in the House of Commons on the Chequers deal, what do you expect your Westminster colleagues to do? Will they vote it down?
As I said yesterday in my statement, I'm happy to repeat it, it's a false distinction. No,
it's a very simple question that needs a yes or no answer.
No, it doesn't. And
if
it's
there's
not
a
going
vote
to, and it's not
in the
going
House
to
of
get...
Commons on the Chequers deal, will your SNP MPs support it,
It is not
or
going to
vote it
get
down?
a yes or no answer, because the reality is there are a range of possible options that will take place. The much more likely vote will be between a blind Brexit, which we do not know what is going to happen, a high-level statement that goes nowhere, or the madness of just opting out. The reality is what everybody should be supporting, and we'll go on arguing for it, as my colleagues in the Commons have been gone on arguing for it, is at the very, very least there should be single market and customs union membership. But we're not going to be put in the position...
We're not the Chequers deal, if it doesn't support that...
We are not going to be put in the position of backing a Prime Minister whose actions upon these matters have been disgraceful, nor we will be in a position
of betraying the people of Scotland who voted
You've answered my question, Mr. Russell. Thank you.
stay in the EU.
Yep.
In all those circumstances, we will do the best thing for Scotland.
Yeah, so you're
it is
voted
not being the midwife of Brexit. Brexit is a disaster for Scotland, and Mr. Fraser, you know that.
You've
And it's
answered my
about
question,
time,
Mr. Russell.
It's
Thank
about
you very
time
much.
you recognise
You will vote it down. Thank you.
There we have it. That's the tribute to Dundee. Dundee's always been optimistic. A wonderful place. 2 great universities, 2 bridges over the Tay, 1 football team. It's a super place already. It's great.
And then, if we really want to get on to politics, negativity and unpleasantness, I've had Marie Todd shouting to me across the corridor here throughout the debate about Westminster and about what's happening in England and Wales. And I would like to afford her this opportunity, if she wants to take it, if we're having a facts-based debate, to explain to this chamber the different choices that have been taken in England and Wales to those that have been taken here in Scotland in relation to the founding principles and the type of curriculum we choose to have.
Forgive me for being sceptical when the Conservatives come to this chamber painting themselves as the champions for the children of Scotland. And as the champions for upholding the will of this Parliament, because this Parliament made it very clear, universal credit.
Order, please.
The children
Order,
in this
please.
country. The two-child cap,
question.
the welfare reform is sending our children to school hungry. What are your policies in the UK government on welfare reform doing to improve attainment in our schools, the poverty-related attainment gap, to give it its full title?
Through the chair, please. Oliver Mundell.
It can never be right that we have any kind of borders in the Irish Sea between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom. She knows that we cannot support any deal that creates a border of any kind in the Irish Sea. Not my words, the words of Ruth Davidson, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives.
Well, and also because not all of... There are some Scottish Tories who are quite hardline Brexit, but certainly Ruth Davidson, although she's not an MP, and a lot of the MPs were actually quite pro staying in the European Union. So it would be very ironical if they ended up being the people who forced a hard Brexit.
Forcing a no-deal Brexit is what we would likely get to. And I think there's something that you were touching on in your interview with Douglas Ross there, which is the weight of the lobbying power of the fishing industry appears unbalanced, because think about...
Sorry to cut you off, but we are going to have to leave it there.
Now, just finally, you are, of course, now an independent. Give us your independent assessment as a Brussels veteran of where you think this is going to end up, the whole Brexit process.
Well, I think as far as Brussels is concerned, you see where it's going. They're holding firm on the Irish backstop. They always were going to. Been very flexible on other issues. But today, the arguments are actually Westminster-centric. So they're around... What they can't understand here in Brussels is how the Prime Minister can have so little control over what's happening in London. And of course that's a self-inflicted wound from having called an election last year and lost her majority. So there's a lot of sympathy. They want to get things done, but they're not going to go any further than they've gone today. And that is to say, look, we'll give you a bit more time, in effect. If you need a little bit more time to sort it out, we'll give you a bit more time. We haven't entirely closed the door on a November summit, but you need to come back with something that you can agree on, particularly on the Irish backstop question. So it's down to Whitehall, Westminster and Number 10, really, to get that sorted. What do I think the prospects are of that? Well, on what's happened in the last 2 years, they're pretty dim, aren't they? I mean, it doesn't look like they're going to get to consensus, but it's all about the maths in the House of Commons, and you're going to get some pretty unholy alliances forming between far out Remainers and far out Leavers, what happens to the DUP, all of that speculation. My own view is that they will cobble together some sort of House of Commons majority, because I know from bitter experience the attitude of the far right anti-EU faction in the Conservative Party. They're pretty ruthless, and actually if they can get a withdrawal agreement that they might not like that much, they'll get themselves through the 29th of March, get out of the EU, so there's no turning back at that point, and then you tell me what's going to happen, because I think we'll have a new Prime Minister and we'll have a new, further to the right, further anti-EU Prime Minister in place, and then they can do what they like in that next period. And that's what really worries me, is by the end of the maybe 2020, maybe 2021, what kind of Brexit will we be looking at? Because actually it's all to play for. Most of it's not in this withdrawal agreement, it's in the future relationship, and we haven't even got to that discussion yet.
Yeah, it is a surprise, because he has been so outspoken in the past about nationalism and a particular brand of Scottish nationalism. He's been a big critic of the idea that some, at least, have held of some kind of sense of superiority by dint of where you're born. So he's been a big critic of that, and has used some very colourful language in the past, even on one occasion comparing Scottish nationalism to the Nazis. And he famously dismissed Holyrood as a pretendy wee parliament in the past as well. So for him to turn around now into clearly be on this journey of going towards the yes vote is quite a turnaround.
Yeah. Hello, sir. Tell me, mostly women on this march. Why are you here?
For equal pay for everybody. Equal pay for women. They've waited long enough in Glasgow for it. It's time to get equal pay out for everybody. Yeah, that's why these unions are marching today.
You say you've waited long enough. Tell me about that, because there have been discussions, there have been promises from the council.
Yeah, there's been promises in the past, and how this is what can action prompts it. When people wait too long for something to come, there comes a time they have to stand up. Nobody wants to lose money. They're here today to take action. They're here today, and I'm here today to support them.
You're from the Communications Worker Union, are you?
I'm from the Communication Workers Union, yes.
I'm bound to ask, Labour have been in power and presiding over this pay structure for many years, the SNP in power for 1 year. Have Labour let you down on equal pay?
No, this is a thing for all this is a thing for all parties to take care of. It's a thing for all parties to be involved in. It's a thing for these women. You know, it's about council cuts that come from SNP. The councils are struggling with cuts that's coming from SNP and Holyrood.
Okay, so thank you very much indeed. Enjoy the rest of your day.
This is an issue that has rooted in the Labour Party, which you remember so many years ago, and also the unions themselves are part of this negotiation. They haven't covered themselves in glory in this, have they?
I don't think anyone struggles to criticise the last Labour administration and their decade of delay, which they oversaw in terms of equal pay. So their hands are certainly not clean on this.
John,
I will comment. I mean, almost regardless of the Brexit process we find ourselves in, there's always been a debate and discussion about how agricultural funding via the Common Agricultural Policy comes into the UK and how that should be allocated across the devolved administrations. And that particularly was brought to the fore back in 2013-14 when the UK was awarded what was called the Convergence Uplift, predominantly because of Scotland's extensive areas of rough grazing, therefore bringing the UK's average payment below the 90% threshold, which then allowed the United Kingdom to receive further funding from the CAP. Pretty complicated stuff, but at the time the UK government took the decision back in 2013 to basically allocate that uplift in funding to the UK on the same historic basis that funds were already allocated. So that Scotland only got 16% of the uplift, yet Scotland was by and large responsible for the 100% of the uplift. And therefore the argument being it should have come to Scotland.
I've said repeatedly in various places that I don't see any good news for independence in Brexit. I think there is an element which has been pretty vocal, but I don't think it's widespread, that says Brexit will somehow help the independence case. I don't think it does. I think the economic consequences of Brexit are too significant for us to play with. I think the proposition, and this is the point I alluded to in the opening remarks, the European proposition was integral to our independence proposition. Our independence proposition was independence in Europe, in the same way as the Good Friday Agreement was constructed in a way that had both bits of the island of Ireland and indeed Great Britain. within the customs market and the single market and the customs union. Our independence proposition in 2014 was that we would, both sides of Carlisle, remain within the customs union, the single market, and the EU and NATO. So it was about negotiating our independence within a framework. If the UK is not going to be within that framework, then our independence proposition will necessarily be different. And I am not going to go to the people of Scotland with a we'll sort it out, or we'll sort it out once the UK decides where it is. We will have a detailed proposition, the same as we did intellectually transparently last time round, and there are parts of that that still need work. So we're not there yet, and I think it's a wee bit dangerously Panglossian to say that Brexit will assist the SNP's case, because I'm not sure it does entirely. I also don't want to see our closest friends and neighbours have a bad time. I think there is a job to be done to try and save, to the extent that we can, the UK from itself. I think UK politics is entering into a really dangerous period that is not going to be somehow stopping at Carlisle. It will infect our politics too. So long as we've got an opportunity to turn that round, I remain a nat. I'm utterly pro-independence. I believe Scotland's best future is as an independent state in Europe, same as Ireland, same as Denmark. If you want to see what independence in Europe looks like, look at what Ireland is now. For the first time ever in Ireland's history, Ireland has the upper hand on the old colonial power, because Ireland is part of the 27, and 27 is a bigger number than 1. But go to Dublin, and there's nobody rejoicing. The issues about the border across the island of Ireland are hugely significant, and they'll be hugely significant for an independent Scotland too. So I really don't think we can make too many firm predictions on that point. I think we need to go through the gears on this process. We need to be really measured in what we're saying.
But I mean, you're right. I mean, Ireland as a country is a much more, firstly, economically successful place than it was in 1973 when we joined the European communities. We have learned to stand on our own 2 feet. I mean, being part of the European Union and the European project has given us as a nation a self-confidence that did not exist heretofore. And that has actually been amplified over the last few years in particular. So, while Ireland actually currently has the fastest growing economy in the European Union, unfortunately, the UK economy has actually slowed down very, very significantly. So, we have a sense of confidence about our economy, about our society, about our politics, and nothing, no degree of insults that might be flung at us by certain individuals in British politics will impact on that. And if anything, we definitely feel a stronger, more assured member of the European Union as well. I mean, there were many in London who doubted the solidarity between EU member states and who said, oh, well, Berlin and Paris, when it comes down to it, will choose London over Dublin because of the strength and size of the UK. But in reality, as we have seen, European solidarity and a view that those countries who wish to remain within the European Union, the single market and the customs union, will stick together and will defend the values and principles that underpin that union. And Ireland has benefited from that. And that's why many are surprised to this day, even though we've been having these same conversations for at least 12 months around the border, around the peace process, and around this issue of a backstop, all of the predictions about fragmentation, about divide and conquer within the EU have been proven wrong. And in fact, Dublin's insistence at every stage that there would be solidarity has proven to be correct. And I have absolutely no doubt that will continue right to the end of this process.
Douglas. And the last point I make, Convener, is this, that the whole point of convergence policy by the EU was to make farm payments fair across the EU. It was to bring up by 1/3 the level of the lowest to 90% of the EU average. Now, I have some figures here that indicate that that the average payment per hectare in the period from 2014 to 2020 for rural development funding per hectare ranges from Malta €1,236, the EU average €76, to Scotland €12. Now, this table here, which I'm happy to share with the committee, shows that next year the rate of receipt of farm support on the hectareage basis, the EU basis of whole payments, will be €12, the EU average will be €76. We will receive the lowest of every single EU state, and less than half of that pertaining in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. So I just mention these because we will need to debate this long and hard. But on the face of it, Scottish farmers and crofters get a raw deal. They've had a raw deal. The UK government have perpetrated that raw deal. And my determination is to stand up for Scottish farmers and crofters and redress that injustice to them, both in the past and in the future.
I think a contraction in the food and drink sector in Scotland is acceptable. It's an acceptable price of Brexit.
I mean, I think we have a very low unemployment rate generally in Scotland, in the UK at the moment. So our problem is not really with the quantity of jobs. It is with the quality of jobs. It's with real wages at the moment. So it's important that the sectors that we really want to grow are the sectors that pay higher wages. We want there to be upward pressure on wages within sectors because those are what determine people's living standards ultimately. And I think that some of these sectors, yes, we do want there to be competition among employers for workers, that the workers will then go to the employers who can pay them the better wages. And those generally are the more productive workers. That is the mechanism by which we become a more prosperous economy and society.
Kenneth Gibson.
Thanks very much, Convener. I mean, to me, this is something that looks as if it's been thought in some kind of laboratory. I mean, if I get Ross Greer talked about real people. If I've got a small guest house in the Highlands, someone in his mid-50s and he's employing 4 or 5 workers, and you're trying to compete not just locally but internationally for customers, by forcing up wages, making my business uncompetitive, am I going to suddenly be working in the artificial intelligence industry or something? I mean, a lot of these people do not have other options. It's simply not the case that the 250,000 people who work in the Scottish tourism industry or the tens of thousands who work in agriculture can change. And I think it's quite flippant to talk about effectively destroying people's livelihoods and businesses by saying we can go back to where we are in 2004. People invested their time, their money, their skills, their emotions in building up businesses, and you seem to think, well, at the end of the day, they're not particularly economically productive, so what? And you talk about quality of life. If ordinary families can't afford to stay in a hotel because they're no longer competitive and they take their money overseas, how is that helping then the UK economy if they're not spending money holidaying in the Highlands or in Cornwall or in Wales? I just don't understand the arguments you're actually putting forward, even from an economic perspective.
The irony, of course, is that the Scottish nationalists would die for the sort of deal that the Ulster Unionists are opposing, because the Ulster Unionists don't want to be attached to the single market, but of course the Scottish nationalists want to be attached to the single market and have a completely different kind of regime. But the two issues I raised go to the heart of what the problem is in the Union. The devolution that should have been automatic raises the question of how serious this government is about devolution. And if they don't believe in it, then people will start to draw conclusions. There is more centralisation going to take place in Whitehall as a result of leaving the European Union, because all these powers are going back to Whitehall from Brussels. And so in relation to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, this is a far more centralised Britain that you would have after March next year. And if these powers are not devolved, then they're held in the centre, and the principle of devolution seems to be at risk.
So 61% of Scotland's exports are to the rest of the United Kingdom. So do you agree that the Scottish Government's priorities should be retaining alignment with the rest of the United Kingdom rather than with the EU, which I think is the Scottish Government's position?
The Scottish Government's position is that we want to grow trade with everybody, be that the rest of the UK, be that the EU, or be that the rest of the world. And we are focused on building up our trade in all aspects there.
And can you remind the committee what percentage of exports from Scotland go to the rest of the UK?
Well, we've already went through the numbers. There's about 60% of if Scotland's total exports, including exports to the rest of the UK, we've already had the numbers. It's about 60% goes to the rest of the UK. But I've also said there is a desire on our part, and if you look at the Irish and other experiences over time, to change that, because it isn't a healthy situation for one country to be so dependent on another for such a high percentage of their exports. So over time, for us to grow our exports to the rest of the UK, but also to grow our exports to the rest of the world faster than that.
don't think Scottish businesses would agree with you that,
I think they would.
that you're suggesting that in fact they should cut their exports
That's exactly
to the rest of the
that
UK,
is
which
exactly
is the position that you take is
that is
absolutely
exactly
shocking.
that is exactly the opposite of what I just said. So please rewind and listen to what I said.
Just to confirm, you said earlier in a response to Ms Hare that the aim is to cut the amount of trade with the rest
That's
of the UK.
absolutely not what I said, and please, for the record, go back and check what I said. What I said was our objective is to increase trade with the rest of the UK, and I made that point very, very clearly.
The impression you gave was that you wanted to see Scotland less dependent on trade with the rest of the United Kingdom and more dependent on trade elsewhere. You said that was a healthier situation. So can you clarify, are you recommending that the rest of the United Kingdom ceases to be as high a priority for Scottish businesses as it is at the moment, and you would like to see them put their attention elsewhere, or are you happy for them to continue to trade with the rest of the United Kingdom to the extent that they do?
Very happy to see all Scottish businesses continue and significantly increase their trade with the rest of the United Kingdom. That's very, very clear. What I'm saying is that the rest of the trade with the rest of the world is a huge focus for us, and I think if you look at Scotland compared to other countries of our size, we do far less trade with the rest of the world than other countries of our size do. I cited Ireland as an example. I could cite Denmark, I could cite Finland, I could cite New Zealand. There's many countries of Scotland's size. This is work that was done in the Growth Commission that trade far more internationally than we do.
Scotland will be better off as a result of this deal.
I believe that Scotland would be considerably worse off if there was a no-deal scenario.
But that's not the question. Are we better off as a result of this deal?
Well, actually, Gary, it is the question.
Because
no, it is.
I presume you went into politics to make people's lives better. Are you saying this deal will make their lives better?
It will make their lives considerably better than having a no-deal scenario and voting down this deal. Because
so it's the least worst option.
That's where we are now.
Northern Ireland will get special treatment because they are in the Union Customs Code. What conditions precisely will be fixed in the Joint Committee?
But this article guarantees that, subject to the fixing of conditions, vessels registered in Northern Ireland will have an advantage over vessels registered in Scotland and other parts of the United Kingdom.
That is my understanding, and that's
I
think rather clear from. Yes, I know.
It's not been talked about very much, but this is something that could have a major impact on the fishing industry and agriculture in other parts of the UK, including Scotland. Isn't that right?
Yes, and I think.
The General said yesterday that firms in Northern Ireland would be advantaged by this arrangement, so I'm interested to hear you disagree with the Attorney General's opinion.
I'm not disagreeing with him, but I am disagreeing with you, Ms Brock, and the First Minister in the way that you've sought to draw the specific issues that have come about by very difficult circumstances.
I don't really see how you're now putting that onto myself and the First Minister.
I am, because in trying to take forward the issue of Scottish nationalism, what you are doing is trying to draw in Northern Ireland into the debate about Scottish nationalism, and I wholly reject that.
Is the Attorney General doing that?
Reject that.
No, I mean, okay, we'll leave it there, but that's...
Mr Thompson, I just think you were a little bit unfair to Ms Brock for raising the very legitimate issue of a possible unfairness to Scotland with the backstop arrangement for Northern Ireland, but we'll maybe leave that aside just now. And I just want you to as a final question, just to answer this. Under any scenario, leaving the European Union's Scottish business and trade is going to suffer. The Scottish Government say up to £9 billion. The Treasury say something different. I'm not entirely sure what the Treasury figure is, though we're aware that the Treasury doesn't factor immigration into its assumptions. Could you perhaps just conclude this particular session by saying that you understand that there will be an issue and a hit for Scottish business and Scottish trade, and that you, as the Secretary of State for Scotland, as these negotiations are going to be going forward, will be doing everything possible to ensure that this will be mitigated?
I will be doing everything that I can to ensure that Scotland gets the best outcome from these negotiations. And the first step, Mr Wishart, in securing that is to vote for the Prime Minister's deal next Tuesday, and I would hope all members of this committee would find themselves able to do that.
Presiding Officer, if we do end up with a no-deal Brexit, it will be entirely clear to the people of Scotland who is to blame for that. And there won't be those who tried to find a solution in our party. It will be those on the Labour benches, on the Liberal Democrat benches, and the SNP benches. They will be the ones who have voted us down the route of a no-deal Brexit, and we will take every opportunity between now and 2021 to remind the voters of Scotland who delivered that to them.
So what the point I'm making, Mr Speaker, is Scotland's marginalisation and its very weak bargaining position within the union that is the United Kingdom has been very exposed by Brexit. After our failure in the independence referendum of 2014, 56 Scottish National Party MPs were elected to this House, yet not one of our amendments to the Scotland Bill at that time got passed, despite the fact we had 56 out of the 59 seats in Scotland and 50% of the vote at that time. Not one. But yet we were told this wonderful Scotland Act was going to give us huge amounts of powers, and we had the most powerful devolved parliament in the world. Well, I ask any fair-minded person in this chamber or anyone watching, does the sequence of events that I've just described really sound like the most powerful devolved parliament in the world to you? Of course it doesn't, because devolution's constitutional fragility has been revealed in Westminster's assertion of control and the attempt to repatriate powers here from Brussels, and also the disregard shown for Scotland's preferences in the negotiations with Brussels. So, Mr Speaker, the Brexit process has told Scottish voters a lot about the reality of devolution, and that power devolved is indeed power retained, and that the United Kingdom is not the union of equals we were told it was before 2014, but a unitary state where devolved power is retrieved to the centre when convenient, and no one but the Conservative Party, who only represent a minority of voters in Scotland, get a say on major decisions over trade and foreign policy.
Well, let's cross to our political correspondent, Andrew Kerr. He's at Holyrood right now. Now, it doesn't really matter what Holyrood votes on this, does it, Andrew? But MSPs are debating this whole Brexit issue at the moment.
I just wanted to ask with him, he said earlier that bringing to an end free movement would be very damaging. What would he say to my constituent, a young Gloucester girl, 8 months pregnant, badly beaten up by her European boyfriend, who is terrified that when he comes out of prison, he will return to haunt her and her family, because this country cannot deport European nationals unless they have served a sentence of longer than 2 years. Does he agree that there are some elements where actually it would be protective, not damaging?
I'm reluctant to get into an individual case. Suffice to say this. We all have constituents with the same young lady who may have been assaulted by a man from the same town who lived 2 streets away. Nationality and the ability to travel in that circumstance, however difficult, is actually irrelevant.
And I was the same, but all the things that I thought were wrong with the EU were about land, the fact that, especially in the UK, the only non-taxable asset that you can own is land. So if I own 2 million acres of land, I pay no tax on it every year.
And you
ever live in a one-bedroom studio flat,
you
I pay council tax on it.
You've got to pay tax on that.
But even in the USA, that's unbelievable. You would pay $20 an acre or something every year on what you own. And these people, if you own 2 million acres or 1 million acres here, you get the EU subsidy every year, and then you shove all that money offshore because you're not even taxed on that money coming in. So yeah, there's unfairness and there's things that are wrong with it, but it's weird that none of that is what they ever want to change about the EU, is it? Because we basically live in a kind of feudal state in the UK. But then when you look at the left and you think, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot here, because if we tied in even more with the EU, we would get better job protection, we would invite maybe even more permanent jobs over here, because if you're a big company like General Motors, Ford or whatever, and you've got a place in Britain, one in Germany, one in France, when there's a bit of a downturn, you get rid of your workers in Britain first because it's cheaper. In France and Germany, you'd have to pay their wages for the next year and all the rest. So you think, well, we'll keep them open, we'll get rid of the ones in Britain. So it's all to do with our government. It's all to do with the kind of serf mentality that we have in the UK, whereby we think, well, they always know better, don't they? You know, and well, it's lovely, we've got the royal family. And we've got but it is, but that's genuinely what it is. And the whole reason they hate the EU is because, you know, they are kind of much more progressive than we are. You know, those other European countries. How can you be, what they keep saying, the 5th richest, 6th richest country in the world, whatever we are, and yet 9 out of the 10 poorest regions in the northern EU are in the UK? I mean, that is a disgrace. You know, why aren't we getting more money in from the EU, which we could do if we agreed to pay them back more? We could bring in loads of money, reinvest properly in all those areas, but they don't want to do it because in the meantime they make money for nothing by sitting on property, sitting on land banks, you know, for doing nothing. All the money launderers in the world are coming to the UK. You look at Manchester, I live in Manchester city centre, 800 empty apartments in Manchester city centre, all owned by Russians, Malaysians and all. They won't drop the price, they won't drop the rents that they want because they don't have to, because just the fact they've got the property means that they'll go up 10 or 11% every year anyway. Where else are they going to get a return like that?
Yeah. Therefore, apart from those provisions and Section 17, this court holds that the Scottish Bill is within the legislative powers of the Scottish Parliament. The court will now adjourn.
So she kept saying, no, I'm going to go forward with the vote. But then it was perfectly obvious she was going to lose the vote. So now there's no vote. And that means she's going to go back to Europe, who have said, well, we're not going to renegotiate.
Yes.
And we're going to have a new series of negotiations as she tries to, quote unquote, seek guarantees. About what? About the virtual status of a border that can't exist?
But I wondered if she was playing in the 12-dimensional chess, like, was she telling people to not vote for it in Parliament as a way to get more concessions out of the EU?
But the EU aren't going to give you any more concessions. They don't have to give you anything.
That's like, who's in the driver's seat, the EU or the UK?
It's never been the UK. I've decided to leave a club. The club had benefits. As I'm on the way out the door, I'd like to negotiate what I still get from the club. No, just no.
But isn't the EU weakened if the UK leaves? And I mean, do they want...
Well, it's never really been in. I mean, this is something else I've said. Think about it. It's never going to join the euro.
Yeah.
It has its own currency. It lives off a giant financial sector that trades euros and dollars and pounds. And the last thing it wants is a tighter set of European regulations on finance or anything else. So it's kind of always been present, but never fully in. And what we're seeing now in Europe as a whole, if you think about the way that Brussels and the Italians have not really faced off and things going on, it is a kind of federal project. It's a kind of incipient federalism, and the Brits never belonged in that. So, you know, they are where they are for various reasons, but the deal they're trying to strike is literally an impossible deal. You can't do that. It's not going to work.
I mean, it looked like the best scenario out of one of the diagrams I saw was that the UK ends up in some sort of like Norway type position. But is there...
But the thing is, the EU is not going to give you that.
That's what I wondered. Is there any concession that will allow that the EU will allow to violate any of those 4 freedoms?
No, absolutely not. The 4 freedoms are Europe. So the notion that you can basically buffet, cherry pick the 4 freedoms, it's just, no, it's not going to happen. So you end up with a fudge and an imaginary fantasy border.
And if you don't, and if you allow someone to violate it, then you've set the precedent, right?
Exactly. And then the Hungarians and the Poles and everybody else kick off in migration.
Yeah.
You lose freedom of movement. After you lose freedom of movement, and capital controls, and the whole thing unravels. So no.
Let's start just quickly with the budget. It's all very complicated, clearly. I suspect there's something in this thing about income tax shortfall of income tax receipts. It's very difficult to understand, but there's some issue lurking in there, isn't there?
Yeah, I think it's one of those bizarre situations that you flagged up there that actually they could probably have been better off if they hadn't actually taken on more powers in terms of
well, Derek
of
McKay seemed to be
tax.
saying no, although it wasn't. But I'll tell you what, there's a general issue that comes up with this, is that because, and just to explain to people, we now have what the Scottish Government gets from the Westminster Government, plus income tax and other tax receipts, and then this thing called the BGA, the Block Grant Adjustment, which is about the intersection of the two. it is now fiendishly complicated.
Yes.
And there's a general issue here, which is arguably it's impossible now for any citizen of Scotland to understand what their government is doing, and the possibilities for obfuscation are almost endless.
Yes, and probably Derek Mackay would say to you also that it's almost impossible for him to understand exactly how much money he's got to be playing with until quite far on in this process, that changes can come that affect, you know, sort of hundreds of millions of pounds. So certainly from the outside looking at it, you're not going to really understand all the different sort of balances and checks in there. It probably is something that over a period of a few years will balance itself out. I think the big headlines as far as the members of the public are concerned are more likely to be what's happening with public pay, what's happening to local authorities, what's happening to health.
But it is difficult for an ordinary citizen, though, just to look at this and say, oh yeah, I understand that.
It's almost impossible, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any more straightforward unless the Scottish Government have more powers and can simplify and rationalise it all out. That seems to me to be somebody who was sitting there watching, when you were talking to Derek Mackay, watching the Scottish budget thinking, if that's at that level and that's at that level and then national insurance comes in and then we're going to do this, you're right, it is fiendishly difficult, but I think the answer is not to have fewer powers for the Scottish Government, it's more, and then they can control more.
All right.
I wanted to ask about estimates of how much oil and gas was remaining in the waters around Scotland. Jim Hunter, I'm going to quote a tweet, which I don't do very often, Minister, but it was a Highland writer and historian posted a fairly wry comment. Geologists baffled as to why North Sea oil reserves shrink and expand in direct correlation with imminent or not of Scottish independence, which I thought was quite good. But I just wondered, I mean, there were lots of quibbles in the run-up to the independence referendum about how much oil was left, and quibbles over Sir Ian Wood's figures and the BP offering their opinions. So I'm just wondering, you know, this is a question I get asked a lot. Who can the public go to for authoritative estimates about those figures? It's, you know, I think I would suggest confusing for many of us in politics, let alone those outside the political bubble. So who can the public trust? Who can they go to?
Well, the figures I've got, which I believe are trustworthy, are that we've had 43 billion BOEs recovered to date. There's an estimate of 10 to 20 billion barrel equivalents that are still remaining in the continental shelf. And you're right, it does seem to go up because it's gone up by 3.7 billion. But there is certainly a level of confidence that we do have, you know, economically recoverable reserves in the North Sea out for, you know, the next 30 to 40 years.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. Thank you.
One of the other things that we tend to get historically is Scotland and Norway in our waters roughly discovered oil at the same time. They've got £1 trillion oil fund, which I just read today accounts for 1.4% of every limited company globally. This is just the oil fund of Norway. Scotland's got its share of the UK's debt and deficit. What do you say to the people of Scotland about what's happened to their North Sea oil, and how have they managed to be able to benefit from it?
Mr Bishop, you're not inviting me to come up with slogans for an indie ref. No, look, I think the point does get made about Norway, and I think, of course, Norway is an entirely different country in terms of population size and complexity and economic demands, and you know, and has not had anything like the same challenges we've had around, you know, the National Health Service funding or the welfare system. It's very different. I know we're not going to talk about shale gas, but I think it is really important, if we are talking about fossil fuel exploitation going forward, that plans, you know, as you know, with the shale industry, to create effectively a sovereign wealth fund, both for national benefit but also at local benefit.
So I think
that's important.
That would be something that would interest you, an oil fund, as we go forward. If we are seeing the figures that you just outlined and there is this potential, could Scotland perhaps
I think
maybe even at this point
I think we've had this debate across the House. I mean, the whole Scottish North Sea exploration was funded by, you know, UK taxpayers and UK.
I'm sure we could have managed it.
So perhaps I won't answer that one.
Okay, well, we'll move on then, shall we?
Your comments on management prior to the EU. It was crisis managed. The industry was crisis managed prior to us joining the EU. Fish were taken out. There was a quota or a level of fish was discussed, and then the boats got on with it. And they just fished, and nobody was really committing to putting a huge amount of money into the science and very, very tightly managing the quotas. And it was a very, very loose situation. And when the boats overfished haddock, the haddock stocks went down, the boats went bust, the mounted boats dropped, and it was crisis managed. What we have had over the last 10 years, I believe, is the finest managed fishery we've seen in my lifetime, and it's working.
So the EU brought order.
The EU have brought order.
Sorry?
So the EU brought order to
We were
fisheries.
dragged screaming. Let's be honest, we were dragged screaming. And the investment in the science, the investment in everything that went into turning this industry around, I think, has been a huge plus.
Because we never hear that. All we ever hear is the EU's thoroughly bad common fisheries policy.
It from me
they
today.
have to get out.
Yeah.
It's the only thing that will rescue and save our fishing industry.
Well, it's the truth. We've had 10 years of growth in our industry on the catching sector.
Thank you for that.
Thank you for that.